on, or just I can just start talking?
Should be on, no?
No button?
Yeah. You want to start?
Sure.
Okay.
Shall we?
We shall.
It has been a long day. Thank you so much for staying up, staying awake, and coming for this session. My name is Victor Lugatov, and I'm facilitator for Water Security Special Initiative at Iron Earth. And today I'm happy to be here, and I just first of all thank all of you to come for this event and to show new interest in this space technologies and its application to environmental solutions and problems. And first of all, indeed, I'd like to thank organizers of this nice event just to allow all of us to come here together and to share our experience and knowledge and skills. And I'm happy to see here quite few representatives from Water Security Initiative, and also other SIs, as some of you who are not really working with who are not yet working with Iron Earth and those communities, you might know that there are 8 different special communities, special initiatives working under Iron Earth. And different topics, 3 of them are foundational and 5 devoted to specific topics. But there is a lot of interconnection between all of them, and I think today's event is one of such successful, I can say it this way, examples of developing this kind of cooperation between Central European University, between Water Security Special Initiatives, and United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. And we were running under Water Security Special Initiative. We were running kind of training for and executive education programs for decision makers for a number of years. And it was devoted for water security. It was called ICTs and water security. In this way, we get used to know quite well Laurent Saran presented here, who is program officer at United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. And for a number of years, we were running those kind of events together. And this event and the idea of this event today came out from this long-lasting cooperation. And I'm proud to be here today and present Laurent, who can share some of our aspects of our activities and share it with all the communities here. Please, Laurent, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm actually pleasantly surprised to see so many of you here with us for this last possible session of the day. The good news is there will be another cocktail reception tomorrow, so I know you missed 2 days, but there will be another one tomorrow. So thanks for being here and thanks for being interested in the topic. I just put together some slides just to set the stage in a way, and then maybe open the floor to questions. I actually post some questions at the end of my slides to in a way give you the cue, and then I'm looking forward to have a more interactive dialogue, a discussion the last minutes of this short side event. So we, as Victor said, I'm with the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs based in Vienna. It's the smallest possible UN office with the biggest possible mandate, as you can imagine. And one of the programs we are implementing, and I'll mention it briefly, is the UN SPIDER program, which deals with space technologies as applied for disaster management. It's a program mandated by the UN General Assembly that started just about 8 years ago, so we are making good progress. So we wanted to focus a bit on water-related disaster management and how space technologies could be useful in that context. As I mentioned, UN SPIDER is one of the programs that we are implementing in this office. And in the last 8 years, or the first 8 years of our existence, we focused on 4 pillars. One is a knowledge management side, a knowledge portal that we have set up, un-spider.org. You can check it out. There's also some brochures we put outside on the table. We are looking at fostering cooperation. Definitely our major role is to connect the space technologies providers with the disaster managers in the different countries. And make that bridge that gap that exists between what disaster managers know or have access to and what these providers could offer. We also focus a lot on capacity building, and that comes out of the different advisory missions that we have to various countries, where we learn of the needs of those countries, and then we try to follow up with these capacity building exercises, training, in essence, government employees in those countries on how better to use these technologies. And then technical advisory support, which is cornerstone of our program, is pretty much going out to those countries and working with them, and you will see where we visited. In the context of today, I wanted to refer to some of the materials that we developed and we posted on our portal that deal with best practices, recommended practices in terms of using these space resources, satellite imagery, and various software tools, modeling tools, to develop products related to water-related disaster management, of course. So here you see an example of using various data sources and modeling techniques to develop flood hazard maps in any kind of context, done in partnership with some university partners that we work with. Or you can see another example of flood extent mapping using radar technology. So in a way, avoiding the fact that optical satellite imagery is not able to penetrate cloud. We are looking at this as another alternate technique. It's a bit more complicated, but with the help of the Ukrainian Space Agency, who has a lot of expertise in this domain, we developed such best recommended practices for flood extent mapping. And these are all posted on our portal and are available for anyone to download, use them, or contact us and get more support. I mentioned the technical advisory support, and in that context, I wanted to show you this map of the different advisory missions we did in the last, well, 6 to 7 years, let's say. And these are countries that invited our office to visit them, to take a group of experts there and to evaluate their use of these space technologies. How can they do better? What are our recommendations? What actions do we recommend to them? So these are all resulting in an official report that we developed and we submit to the government. And then we try to follow up on the numerous recommendations that these reports come up with. So, and that's where we then go into capacity building, facilitating access to data for those countries and so on. And there's a lot of needs, of course. I wish I could say that from the 100-something actions that we identified in those 30+ countries, we managed to address all. We didn't even manage to address 10% of them. There's a lack of resources, lack of time, and a lot of other reasons. But there's a lot more to do. The one example, for example, in how we supported Namibia in the past, this is a few years ago already. Their biggest problems is floods, of course, which are periodic, so happening almost every year. And then once we had this first advisory mission, we looked into their needs. We partnered with a number of space agencies, with a number of institutions who have already been doing work in this area, and we looked at what different space assets, satellite imagery could be used in modeling and forecasting the flooding in Namibia, and then we also looked at maybe extending that to the broader region of Southern Africa. So we developed these products that help the hydrology department of Namibia do this more accurate forecasting maybe. And also we developed a project proposal together to be submitted for regional donors to maybe extend that practice to the whole region. So that's just one example where we supported the country based on our assessment on how to use these technologies in their flood management. I think one thing I want to insist on, and I'm very happy to have here colleagues from Digital Globe who we have been working together in the past. Ed Parsons from Google, we all know Google owns Skybox. I don't know if Robbie is here from, yes, thank you very much. That was a last minute invitation, so thanks for joining us from Planet Labs. We saw your interesting presentation this morning. So I'm happy actually to have colleagues from the private industry, let's say, providing this kind of satellite assets for our work. And I'm happy to say that after my 18, 19 years in the UN, there is a lot of progress that I can see today in terms of at least providing options to us in terms of accessing this data. Of course, in many cases it comes at a cost, and that's the point that we should also address. But these are just some examples that, thanks to Digital Globe, I wanted to put up on the screen. Just some floods happening 3 to 4 weeks ago in Dominica or Japan. And then you see that kind of very, very accurate, detailed imagery coming up maybe a day or two after the event happened, and then these response mechanisms being triggered. This is the Dominica example. You could see clearly damaged infrastructure, roads, down to the property level, inundated houses, and so on. These are the next 3 slides are just some images from the Japan flooding. These were taken 11 September. Again, you could see this very, very detailed level of damage. So it definitely helps the local responders, and in case the UN is requested to help in terms of assessing damage and sizing response and all that. So just some examples. I don't want to, of course, I'm sure you've seen thousands of these, and there's a lot more, but these are just recent. And to me, the most exciting part is that with the services and with the offerings of these entities, we have the possibility to access this data, within hours or a day or two. While I remember still in 2004 when we were responding to the Indonesian tsunami, or in 2008 to the Myanmar Nargis cyclone, it took us weeks to get access to this kind of data, and took us other weeks to process that data and then ship it to our colleagues in OCHA, in other missions on the ground on small compressed image chips that they could use and download on their little satellite links. So it took us weeks, and today this is possible to reach them within hours or days if we really work closely with the providers, and if we have the resources to access these services, of course. So the question is, of course, how do we access them? And that's, I call it in one word, progress. I can definitely say it's a lot of progress that we have achieved in the last years. Now, we have a number of providers. I just list here some of the commercial partners that I mentioned. And there's many others, of course, who can offer these quick and fast access to high-resolution data, to satellite imagery. We are also working with a number of space agencies. We just recently signed an agreement with the Chinese Space Agency, with the Israel Space Agency, with the also the Italian Space Agency for their radar data, and we are working with other countries that have satellite resources, sub-meter satellite imagery, to have these MOUs in place so that we can call on them, we can request them to task their satellites and provide free data to disaster response whenever is needed. So pulling in more of these resources, pulling in more of these sensors just means that we have a better chance to get very quick coverage in any corner of the world immediately or quickly enough after a disaster. Because in essence, satellite data is most useful in the first hours after something happens, and before maybe crews can be deployed on the ground. There are also unique situations like 2008 in Myanmar when we couldn't have people on the ground for 3 weeks after. So for 3 weeks, imagery was our best bet to identify damage on the ground, people affected, and there we were talking 200,000 dead and more than 1.5 million affected. So the only estimate was a satellite imagery base because it was a special situation. But then in other cases, maybe crews are on the ground within days or within a day or two. But imagery can tell us already what the extent of that problem is within hours, again, if we are clever in how to use it. So those are some of the questions I want to post. How can the community best benefit from such services? Yes, we know they are there. We know sometimes they are costly. They have a price. We have to get, in a way, smart in how we use these services and how we share those resources. Can some of the mandated organizations, like my office, which has that unique mandate to bridge the space technology providers to the disaster managers, given to it by the UN General Assembly, which is all the 193 member states that we know of today? Or can GEO, as another specialized organization, and they are also here, better facilitate this kind of access? And then I'm sure you might have other questions. So I leave it at that with our contact details and our website. And in the 15 minutes or so we have left, I might open the floor for any other questions. But before that, maybe Taner, you want to say a few words about your Seeing a Better World from Digital Globe's perspective?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Maybe can get the microphone. Thank you.
Test.
Yeah, it's working.
Tanir Kadanas with Digital Globe. I head up our Seeing a Better World program, and as Laurent mentioned, we have a unique relationship with the Outer Space Affairs Group with regards to the MOU we signed earlier this year. But it basically memorializes what Laurent mentioned, which is how do we work more efficiently and more effectively with organizations that are trying to support not only governments, but first responders on the ground. As you mentioned, today we have the opportunity to capture these images and make them available literally within a couple hours, even less than an hour in some cases. And so what we want to do is create a workflow and mainstream this so that we don't have to guess. I remember when the earthquake in Nepal occurred, I got a text from Laurent on a Saturday morning saying, I hope you're tasking satellites, which we were, of course, and we were able to create imagery and information available right away. But it shouldn't be about texting between us. It should be something that should be more, consistent and reliable. So we are exploring ways and looking for your organization, as well as, like you said, GEO and others, to provide guidance on the best way that we can support the organization rather than making it haphazard.
Thank you very much. I don't know, Ed, would you want to add something also from Google/Skybox perspective?
No, not really, other than I think we appreciate that same role. It makes a lot of sense for there to be a central coordinating body for this sort of crisis management. So when something happens and you want to break the imaginary glass to get access to the data, it makes sense that you go to one place rather than coming shopping around all of us. And all of us obviously have the capability to deliver, but it does make sense if that's centralized. So we, alongside our friends at Digital Globe, and I'm sure Planet Labs would be happy to work with you in whatever form that then takes. But I guess it really needs to be from the perspective of the users, from those NGOs and those organizations that want access to the imagery. What do they need? What do they need? How do they need it? What's the best delivery mechanism?
Yeah, thanks. And the point is, of course, having reached out to all those countries and to all those organizations, we do have that perspective. And of course, for me, it's important in the UN context, at least, to act on mandates. To, again, not to be everybody jumps on everything, but act on a mandate. And then, of course, other institutions also to recognize the mandate of certain entities. I think that's the cleanest way of doing this and working together. Robbie, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but if you want to say a few words also as Planet Labs, please do. Don't feel obliged, but thanks for coming again.
Sure, yeah, it's great to be here. So there's the disaster charter that has been signed by many countries, and being a U.S. company predominantly, we work with USGS when that does get called. And USGS does have a website that probably, and a long mailing list that goes out probably about 50 times a year when it does get called. And it is pretty manual. So some things that we can do to improve that process for timely access and freeing up of data are two things. One is if there's an agreed upon license and terms for how the data gets used. And two is for it to be more automated. So immediately right away, you can you can see what the archive is of that region for the area of interest and time of interest. And secondly, for those that are tasking to be able to really hook into more of the processes internally for the companies and organizations to make sure that is a prioritized activity. And because there's on average once a week, it would be good maybe if there was a severity of some of these. In some of the disasters, fresh imagery right after is way more important than some of the other ones. Yeah. So maybe if there was a bit of a prioritization, and again, the more this is agreed upon beforehand, the more automated it is, we could actually be better, in a better position to respond.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and then to your point, of course the Disasters Charter exists since I think 2000, 2001, and 40, 50 activations a year, but then again, the problem is that we have maybe 200, 300 disasters around the world every year which are causing damage or causing displacement, and the charter is not able to address them all. Very few are able to address them all. Sometimes, you know, you have to be in the news to be addressed. And these are things that we have to come over also. So that's where these partnerships have to kind of broaden and encompass or cover much more than maybe we could in the past. And I forgot to also mention, of course, that floods are maybe the types of disaster that displace most people, that affect most people. Maybe not killing most, that's earthquakes. We have statistics to that. But sometimes we have to worry more about those affected than those killed, because you can't do much for those who died, but you can do a lot more for those who are just affected, or even predict good enough so that they can avoid maybe a lot of the damage and problems they have. And of course there's drought, which again, I forgot to mention, drought is that silent killer in a way that we often forget, and it's often not even considered a disaster by some. But we have to also look at that and better forecast and better model that, again, using space data, because that also affects a lot of lives. So any other questions or points, I see, please.
Yes, I'm a deputy rep to IRENA for France. I'm also in charge of climate issues and working on COP here at the embassy. Obviously, you're talking about a subject that is tightly related to climate change and the increase of disasters. I was wondering, listening to you and to the number of efforts, but also the gap that are existing, if not, but I haven't seen it. I might have missed it in the initiatives. If there is some initiative around this issue, because COP21 is really a moment where you can get people together, making commitments to improve and making strong commitments. And adaptation, as you know, is one very important component where a lot of countries are waiting, developing countries to, or developed countries to support developing countries. Is there, if not, why not? Why not use this momentum to try to get people together, international organization, private sector, whoever, spatial sector, and build something and put a proposal on the table. It's a very important issue, and it's one that people see every day on TV. So,
thank you. Well, it's a good point, and we are trying to reach out to that climate change community, and we have actually an office in Bonn which is co-located with UNFCCC Secretariat, so we tried on many fronts. And sometimes the problem is that this is technology, this is data. Some people think there's enough data out there, others think that, well, you know, you could do with what you have already. So there's a lot of disagreement also in the community. Do we need more, or are we all happy and satisfied with what we have? And I think we should not be satisfied, but again, there's that argument also. So, but there's definitely efforts in that context. I see the gentleman here had the question, and then I come to you. Yeah. Here. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Justin Saunders from a company called eMapSite. I'm actually also a GIS expert with the World Bank currently in Malawi. Now, with we basically had some support from the charter, which was very successful because it meant that we could get the data almost immediately afterwards. But what I could raise for this sort of this agenda is that we could do some more to do with preparedness before an event, and that backs up also the last suggestion about climate change. There's a lot of areas in the world that can't afford to have the satellite imagery from the suppliers, yet they might flood very frequently. So some of the success stories we had in Malawi were that we could go and do some community mapping beforehand using data that was available that didn't necessarily have to be radar or didn't have to be at the particular time of the flooding. So we used optical imagery of high resolution. So that just would be a good suggestion for the future, that your organization could take on some of the areas that are continually being affected by climate change.
Yeah. Thanks very much. It's a good point. And I forgot to mention that, of course, UN SPIDER is about covering the full disaster management cycle. So our mandate is not only for response, but for that full cycle, starting with preparedness, mitigation, then emergency response, reconstruction. So the full, and that's what's important, because of course mechanisms such as the charter are strictly there for 10 days after a disaster. You try to activate it on the 11th day, they say no. So we have to get over that, and that's a good point you are making. And but then again, most of the time resources and sympathy is there when there's a response and when there's a big one. But it's not there when, you know, it's just few hundred people dead somewhere, or it's not on CNN. Then the problem is we can't get enough sympathy to get free data. So we have to get over that, and we have to find mechanisms to cover all the needs and everywhere, and also for that preparedness phase that allows for better risk mapping, for better hazard assessment and all that. Question back there I saw? Yeah, both. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Jane Robins with Disaster Reduction and Resilience Solutions. It's a little bit along the line of what he was just commenting on, but with the Sendai framework now approved, and we know that disaster risk reduction saves anywhere from $4 to $10 in response after the fact. How do countries get to this information? I mean, I'm working with Indonesia now, looking at response planning, but the issue being is they want this kind of imagery ahead of the event, and then overlay it with some of the other data they've got so that they can then know where to pre-position things and move things, or where to tell people, no, you're not allowed to build anymore because it's a high-risk zone. So how is it, you know, that we can get this information to them, understanding that the millions of aid money come in post-event?
Yeah, and that's a key question, of course, and you have a good point. We were there in Sendai. We tried to set up a so-called partnership for promoting space technologies for the risk reduction for that first phase, and we have that on paper. Yes, let's see how we can act on it and how we can actually get results in that partnership, because as you say, can countries get access to that kind of data in advance? And for that, unfortunately, the only solution sometimes is to have enough funds to cover for that kind of how should I say, requirement. Because if we would have resources, then yes, we would, you know, license that data and provide it to the country on request for that risk, for that hazard mapping. Or sometimes we know that something hits, and then we can task those satellites in advance, but then we still have to pay for the data. So sometimes it's really boiling down to having the resources and the funds for it. But we try. There was another question in the back.
Thanks. My name is Derek Glidden. I work for GD, the organizer here. I'm interested to know what's typically the latency between an event and the tasking of a satellite to acquire imagery. Excuse me. And if it's substantial, or often substantial, whether or not the stuff that was discussed in the previous session on machine learning, automated pattern recognition, cloud computing could be brought to bear such that the platforms, or perhaps the ground stations at least, actually do automatic pattern recognition, particularly of high-risk areas, so that they can detect change And rather than being reactive to somebody sending a text message, the satellite sends you a text message or the ground station and says, hang on, there's a lot of change here. Is that credible?
It is, and there are efforts in that respect. That example I showed you on Namibia, that was based on precipitation data for TRIM and other, the precipitation measurement satellites that would predict that flooding will happen depending on certain elevation and other conditions 2-3 days down the stream. So in that case, yes, we can task satellites in advance to monitor those areas where we predict flooding can happen. And that project in Namibia was based on that, and that's one of the many. But we can do this definitely better today than we did it 10 years ago, and now the TRIM is dead, but then there's a global precipitation constellation of satellites just measuring precipitation, so we can get better at flooding, definitely. But then again, high resolution costs. So I always go back to the same point. Some of this can only be done if there is adequate resources allocated and not duplicated, but done together, because we can always have little project in 1,000 different directions and pay 1,000 times, or we can do something together jointly. Another point here.
I just wanted to respond to Derek. I think there is a change afoot, and I think Robbie hinted at this in his presentation this morning, in that with these new constellations of low Earth orbit optical satellites that have the potential to image the planet daily, we're moving away from a model where you task a satellite. You're going to a model where wherever you're interested in, there will be an image from today of that location. And you can then start to apply machine learning to those images to say, is there anything different on this image to the image from yesterday? And you can train your machine learning algorithms to look at water resources or urban development, count containers in a port. So you're coming, I think, eventually you're going to move away from here's the image that you've been looking for to here's the amount of flooding per hectare, a number of hectares flooded in this particular incident, or the number of bridges that have fallen down. Mm-hmm. And we'll move away from an image that you have to interpret to actually having the information you're looking for provided. That's still a little bit science fiction, but it's not very far away.
I'd give it a few years and we are there, but it's great progress, as I said. The key word is progress. And just because you had a question, latency, I mean, even if it's a sudden disaster, because with flooding and other situations, you can maybe predict a bit. But with an earthquake, you can't. But you can, based on automated notifications and text messages between good partners, you can task a satellite starting, 5-10 minutes after the earthquake happened if you recognize the conditions that are kind of pointing to a disaster, as it was in Nepal. Some of us knew immediately that's going to be a big problem. So in 10 minutes, taskings were going out. And then the question is, of course, how fast the satellite is above the location. That gets much better because now we have more satellites. And then you have a better chance. Even in Haiti, the first image we got 10 hours after was a Chinese satellite. It wasn't Digital Globe, it was a Chinese satellite. They were fastest above that location. The good thing is we could get the data because we had a partnership. So latency is going down. I mean, it's definitely getting better, and it will only get better. One last question, maybe, because we are running out of time, and there's a wrap-up at 8 o'clock in a plenary room, so I don't want to hold you back. Maybe one last question, and then, of course, I'm happy to talk, and we have tomorrow some other imagery-related discussions on the afternoon sessions, water security and refugee, so you can find us on the agenda. Any other questions, maybe? Please.
Yeah, along with those high-resolution monitoring of localized and local disasters, I wonder if you also consider coarse-resolution, large-scale monitoring of water-related disasters. As more and more, we see more and more evidence that those disasters getting very large scale, even go to regional scale, cross-boundary of countries.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Again, in half hour, we don't have time to cover too much, but there is a global flood monitoring working group, which is using modeling and MODIS data, which is the 250-meter resolution satellite data, to develop early river discharge data. So you can actually, and you have this little, you can find them online, and you can have the little green and yellow and red zones on river basins which mark chance of flooding or possibility of flooding, just based on modeling and MODIS data. And there is other such initiatives to use low resolution data on a regular basis to model and forecast. So that's happening, and of course it can be done better, but there are groups dedicated to this. Dartmouth Flood Observatory was doing great work and looking back, 20-something years. So that's a good point too. But again, sorry, I don't want to hold you up much longer. So thank you very much for joining us at this late hour. Some brochures outside, and we'll be here for the rest of the week to answer other questions or work with you. Thank you again.